we've been talking a lot in the last day and a half about the transition that our practice is going through. And we've been talking about a move away from pure strategy and a move towards being involved in the guardianship and the running and the iteration of products and services. So I hope that this won't be anything new to you and that it might give you some interesting kind of things to think about. So yes, I am going to talk about chicken shops. I'm going to talk about platforms, and I'm going to talk about chaos, which we've already mentioned a little bit this morning, so really good. But what I'm probably going to speak to you mostly about is designing the future, and why we shouldn't probably do it. When I work on projects, I get asked about the future a lot. And I think this is probably what most people think about when they think about the future. This is a picture from the Watchtower, which is a very well-known religious publication, if you are a Mormon. It's interesting. It has some interesting ideas about the way that we will live in the future, and it includes sort of lions being petted by people with really massive moustaches, and bears nibbling sort of things out of people's hands. And obviously, we don't think that you're going to be petting lions in the future. No one really thinks that. Even to the people who probably produced this magazine, they don't think it either because it's ridiculous. But when we do think about the future, we do think that it will be a certain progression from where we are. We think it will be better, and we think that the past was probably worse because it kind of has to be. Otherwise, we're just going to get really angry. So yeah, when we think about the future, it's probably something a little bit like this, only with Siris and Roombas and things that will do it, all of our kind of menial daily tasks for us. As designers, in this conference, I've heard the phrase "making the world a better place" constantly. We are obsessed with making a certainly better future. And it's an interesting kind of an idea. I don't think that the future will look like this because I sort of think that the future will look like this. This is my local chicken shop, and it is fantastic. If you're ever in Bethnal Green, you should go to it in London. It is fantastic for a number of different reasons, not namely just because the fact that they do a really brilliant chicken supreme, which I won't explain it, but it's really delicious. They're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it is always reasonably full. This is kind of a quiet time. It's probably about sort of 7:30 in the winter on a Tuesday, I think it was. So it's there's always someone in there, but it comes and goes. What's really interesting about this chicken shop is that it's, and bear with me just for a second, this is an excellent example of entropy. Because this chicken shop can produce food for cheaper than I can produce it at home. If I wanted to produce any of these things, it would cost me inordinately more to produce it than this chicken shop can. And it would cost me more because I am having to do one single instance of cooking a chicken burger. This place has massive economies of scale. It's only a small chicken shop, but it accesses a number of different systems which reduce the cost of chicken to the tiniest amount that it could possibly be. It's very efficient. It does exactly what it needs to get cheap chicken to this chicken shop. But equally, the cost of cooking a chicken burger in my house is much, much more expensive because I have to have one oven cooking one chicken burger, or two, if I'm being nice to my boyfriend. And I'm doing that repeatedly. But this chicken shop is cooking them, cooking thousands of chicken burgers on one oven. There is a massive loss of energy and information when you transfer things in a system. We all know this. We're talking about translation earlier on in the conference, about the fact that when we hand over our ideas to our clients, they often get sort of lost and dissipated. Well, the same thing happens to energy, and it means that actually a lot of the services that we produce are being massively centralized. And it's doing some very interesting things to the way that we think about where we go to buy certain things and where we go to access a particular service. Because the future has no morality. We want to make the world a better place. The world just wants to be. The world will abide laws like entropy, like, you know, the sort of dissipation into chaos that we all see happening all the time. We have this kind of idea as designers that just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should. We're defined by the types of decisions that we make, and we're defined by the process of decision making. We talked yesterday, someone was mentioning a Segway, that it was a massive waste of resource. Well, yes, it is, possibly, but it happened anyway. There's a certain inevitability, because if something can happen, then it probably will, because that's what the internet does. That's what technology does. It moves forward relentlessly. And that's not to say that the people who are developing these things, developing the segways, or, you know, developing any kind of technological platform, are not without any kind of moral sensibility. You know, I have a lot of friends. I have a lot of friends who are developers. I do, and they're very, very, you know, kind of thinking, moral kinds of people. But this stuff happens anyway, and there's not really a huge amount that we can do. This made me really angry recently. This is something that was written in the recent Restarting Britain report that was produced by the Design Commission. And it says, you know, in a very kind of obvious sort of way, disjointed incrementalism characterizes public service design, where services are altered and adapted by changing political drivers, professional fashions, and shifting institutional boundaries. Well, you know, if you took the context out of this, this would just sound like evolution. Things are disjointed, and things are incremental, and they do adapt to the things that are around them, because that's the whole point. And I actually don't want to live in a world where my public services are not adapting to political drivers, because political drivers are supposed to be adapting to me as a citizen. You know, Ben Terrett was talking about it yesterday, the fact that politics is supposed to be adapting to the way that we work and the things that we need in our lives. So yes, our services will be iterative. They will be disjointed, and we will need to probably work in this particular way. So these things, these kind of constant motions towards centralization, towards massive economies of scale, towards things that we have no control over as designers are happening. And we can either get angry about it, and we can write, you know, reports like that, and we can wave a finger and say, you shouldn't be so disjointed, you shouldn't be so incremental. Or we can learn to be with those services and shape them and move them in a direction. So when we're talking about platforms, what we're talking about is the capability to be able to design capabilities, to be able to design the ability for a business or an organization or a group of people, because that's what we're becoming, just groups of people, to create any service, to adapt and move and change with time. So that may not make so much sense at the moment, but hopefully it will do. I love how much Eon are getting credits at the moment. This is brilliant. Eon are here again. This is a picture of Cranbrook, which is a new development in Devon. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's one of the first instances of a from-scratch community that has been built around a district heating power source. And I'm guessing probably a lot of you who are kind of into this idea of centralization, as I am, probably know what district heating is. But essentially it's the concept that you heat the water from your power station and you distribute it to houses. So not only are you selling electricity, but you're selling hot water. And it means that there is no power lost in sort of sending the electricity to thousands of homes and getting them to heat the water. It's very, very efficient, just as the chicken shop is very efficient at delivering chicken. And it's a great example of the way that this kind of collectivization in communities is happening around massive economies of scale. This is another particularly good example. This is the London Hackspace, which is a space in London where people get together to build new things. And the interesting thing about the Hackspace is that they've bought 3D printers, they've bought a number of different things collectively that they couldn't do on their own. They're an example of the fact that your service, the service that you're designing, the business that you're designing, is probably in the business now of distributing other people's products and services. Kickstarter is in the business of delivering other people's services and products. That's what this place is doing. And it's doing some very weird things to the way that we think about our relationships with each other. This is a picture of the lab in NASA after the latest rover landed on Mars. It's really fascinating. I find it really fascinating because it's a picture of a group of people who have worked together collectively, just as the people in the Hackspace are working together, just as the people who are kind of working around on Kickstarter to create a holistic thing, create Kickstarter, create the Hackspace. They work together as a team for an inordinate amount of time on this rover. They adapted the way that they lived their lives. They started talking about souls instead of days, which is a Martian day. It's slightly longer than an Earth day. Oh, gosh, that was a bit shocking, sorry. I'm trying not to breathe in that direction. They went through this massive collective experience together. And what sort of happened was when the Mars rover landed successfulin, it got a lot of press, and people were very excited about it, obviously. But this is how it was reported in Science Today. Okay, so Science Today is not a peer-reviewed, kind of very high. Well, it is peer-reviewed, but it's not a terribly academic publication. But they've talked about the fact that the rovers are enjoying a success in Congress. Not the team, but the rovers. The rover became the team, and we anthropomorphized this object because it was easier than talking about the intent and the wishes and the desires of this collective group of people. We don't have the words to talk about collective experiences yet, and yet that's what we're doing every day. We're giving our information to companies, and they're turning it into products and services for us occasionally, and then redistributing it back to us. We're creating financial services in a peer-to-peer way, and who has responsibility and control over those things? No one is kind of taking control of that experience. And it's interesting because a lot of these collective decisions are happening in the background, behind the everyday experiences that we have. This is one of the first cash machines, or ATMs, if you want to call them that was created. And what's interesting about the first cash machine was the fact that in the UK, certainly, this is what you accessed a cash machine with. This is Barclay Cash, which was, this particular one is from 1968. So it was one of the first ones. It was launched, I think, in 1967. And in order to use the cash machine, you had to bring this, you basically had to go to your bank and say, I want to use the cash machine, and you had to have more than £200 in your account. You could only use this particular thing 20 times. And so it had a really weird kind of symbiosis to the experience that you previously had. When you went to your bank manager and said, I want more money than I have, I want an overdraft, you had to look into their eyes and say, I want an overdraft because of the following reasons. It was a consultative process. The first cash machine did exactly the same. You couldn't really actually become overdrawn. It was actually really, really difficult. And so when things kind of change from this, When we as an organization, or we as a disparate collection of customers, people who work in an organization, agencies, all of the people who are involved in decision making decide to change something, those things kind of get condensed to the overall experience. We don't know why you made these decisions. We don't know why you can now get an overdraft, but ultimately you can, and you can go overdrawn on your account relatively easily, which obviously banks are really, you know, Lee, for example, yesterday, you know, I'm kind of excited about the fact that banks are becoming that much more user-centered. So this is an image from a piece of research that I did a while ago. And it's kind of an interesting example of the fact that even when you have a sort of certain experience that you're going for, that you want people to understand in a particular way, like your Barclaycard cash machine. You want people to understand it in the same way that they understood working with a bank. Those things don't often necessarily work out in the way that you want them to. This particular person kept receipts for 72 hours on average. And they kept them because they believed there was some kind of information on those receipts that was dangerous, that only lasted for 72 hours. I don't know how many of you in here have ever felt a bit weird about chucking away a receipt. You probably have. I know I do, because you don't know how they work. They're kind of abstract things. They've got numbers on them, and the numbers aren't clear what they actually do. This particular piece of research kind of revealed the fact that actually 72 hours is roughly the amount of time that most people keep their receipts for. But there were people that were sort of putting them in great big bags in their garages, and there was a guy who sort of had a glove compartment full of them. And they're a perfect example. This is what they said. It's 24 hours, not 72, but the average was 72. When we don't know how something works, we will make it up. We all know this. It's not new. And yet, this feels wrong. This feels wrong because we're taught as designers that form should follow function, not function following form, but this is what's happening in reality to your service and to your product, and the beautiful decisions that you made for 6 months. This is what's happening. Someone is deciding that actually they're going to keep their receipts and they're going to put them in their wallet for 24 hours because they're dangerous. And to all intents and purposes, receipts are now dangerous to most people because we don't know better. We don't know otherwise. We will make it up if we don't know. And some of the best design, I think, I'm standing here, so you have to listen to what I think. Some of the best design, I think, actually makes use of those things, makes use of the fact that we will make stuff up and we will adapt things and we will change them over time. This, I honestly do think, it's only November, so you know there's still time. I think this is the best piece of design I've seen all year. This is a cup that was sort of at a food cart at Chelsea Flower Show this year. And what happened was, I found this basically at sort of about 2 in the afternoon. So anyone who's been to Chelsea Flower Show will know that, people who go there get up very early and they go straight there. They have their tea. There's probably hundreds of people who have had tea at this stall by this point. And it's interesting because every single person who sort of used one of these sticks decided that in order to make the cup a little bit bigger, they'd stick the sticks around the outside. And that would mean that you could actually have more tea bags in it. And obviously, they're not thinking about that necessarily at the time. They're just sticking their stick around the outside. They're not sort of planning for the future. They're not thinking necessarily about other people. They're just sort of sticking the sticks around the outside, and because they've got a tea bag in their hand, they don't really know what to do with it. But the fact that these sticks can do that because they're very simple. They're just one piece of stick. and you stick it down the side of a cup, and then you stick your tea bag in the middle. The fact that they are so simple means that you can do that with this. The types of products and services that we make are complex, and they're very difficult to actually do something like this with. You know, there's been a few conversations around the room about sort of Raspberry Pi and Arduinos and various other things like that. And they have the same principle, that you can easily hack them because they easily fit together as bits. David Weinberger famously said that the internet is essentially a collection of small things loosely joined. And that's what that teacup is. It's just small things loosely joined by no particular intent other than that particular situation. And ultimately, it meant that the person who was manning that food cart at that time didn't have to keep replacing that cup, and didn't have to have a bin, because these people fixed it for them. And would they have thought of that themselves? I certainly wouldn't have thought about that. I would have put a bin next to there, and maybe that would have been better. But at this particular moment, on this shelf where you walked up and you were looking around and the bin was the other side of the queue, this was the best thing for me. And what we're really talking about in this situation is the idea of modularity, that things can fit together, that when you are a business whose business is delivering other people's things, those things need to fit with your things very quickly. They need to be able to be taken apart and reconfigured. I think it's a kind of interesting example of the fact that we've had a lot of font issues with PowerPoint today. And I really feel for people in that situation because it happens all the time. Because of the fact that those things are, PowerPoint, fonts, your operating system, the operating system of this presentation thing that we're using right here, kind of aren't that, they're not interoperable and they're not modular. I'm not showing off here, but this is a PDF, and the reason why I use PDFs is because I don't have font issues. It means that the fonts are compressed and embedded within the actual object, and I don't have to worry about it. They're modular. They can slot in, they can slot out again. This is an interesting picture that was taken as part of more research, obviously, of someone who was using their Nike Plus wristband to basically charge it in their Apple iPod charger. The iPod charger is plugged into an adapter, because this was a UK person abroad, and plugged into the wall. There's a socket, there's an adapter, there's a charger, and there's a Nike product. And they all work together, and they work together because of standards. If all of the plugs were different, then you'd be fucked. You really would be. Sorry, I didn't mention I swear quite a lot. But what's interesting about this is the fact that it's really clear whose responsibility each of these things are. I'm not going to go to Nike and say, oh, I'm really sorry, but I broke my wristband because I tried to plug it into an Apple product, because I kind of know that those are two different entities. In a world where our services are delivered by other people, not necessarily branded companies, will that be as clear? I don't really know. I mean, I know a particular example that sort of springs to mind of the fact that cable and broadband companies spend an awful lot of money answering phone calls about remote controls. And if anyone is here that can sort of prove or disprove this within their own company, then please do. But this is the anecdotal experience that I have working with one such company. And that happens because it's not clear who owns that remote control. I mean, maybe it's Samsung, but are you going to phone them, or are you going to phone the person who was in your house installing your cable, installing your broadband? It's not clear where the edges of that service are and whose responsibility they are. And ultimately, this kind of has an interesting kind of implication on the way that we deal with systems and services that are parts of systems. Because traditionally, systems systems are trustworthy because they have edges and because we know what those edges are. This is a sign that is, it's been up in London for a very long time, warning people not to take minicabs because if it's not booked, it's a stranger's car. And you sort of look at it and you go, yeah. They're normally on the tube anyway, so it's slightly ironic. But you know, you think, yeah, of course, you know, a minicab is, you know, it's just a stranger's car, until you realise that actually a car that you get from here is just a stranger's car as well. Why is this person less of a stranger than the person who I just flagged down on the street? Well, the only reason why they're less of a stranger is because I'm basically stacking a whole load of things that I know about companies like this, or at least that I think that I know, because I think that I know that the person driving a cab for this company, because they're getting a wage, probably is known to the company that they're working for. They probably have their address. They've probably maybe done CRB checking on them, but probably not. There's a whole lot of things that I'm presuming about this system, about this service, and I trust it because I think I know how it works. But I don't really know how it works. I just know certain elements about the way that services like that, services like employment, relationships like working in a company and distributing a service. I kind of know a lot of anecdotal stuff about that because I have experience of it. But in a world where those relationships aren't as clear, where, you know, my employer is also my contemporary, is also my customer, I'm not really sure what the requirements of that relationship are. You know, do you have to go through any kind of checking process to deliver something on Kickstarter? You might do, but I don't know. You know, that product that I buy, it could kill me, but who cares? Just lastly, to kind of finish up, some things that at Engine we think about when we think about collectivized platform-based services, the Kickstarters, the Hackspaces, the things that are made up of other people's things. When we think about those things, there are some sort of core concepts that we have in the back of our minds. And these aren't, you know, these aren't point 1 to 4. These are things you should do, but maybe it would be good to think about them. Designing borders, not boundaries. Things need to be interoperable. You need to get your information in and out of a service, and because you own it. But it's very important that you know where the edges of that are, because you need to be able to trust something. The Apple Store is a classic example of this, the fact that, you know, you can't put porn on the Apple Store. I used to work for Tate. Tate has a lot of porn. And we wanted to put it on the App Store. Obviously, it's art porn. But to Apple, they don't care. They don't care whether or not it's art and who classifies it as art, because to them, as an American company, looking at this, they thought it was porn, and they denied some of the content that we put there. So think about the borders that you have. Think about the boundaries and what that does to people. Learn to scale honestly. We've talked a lot about startups and how great they are at just creating something and iterating and doing all that kind of jazzy stuff that often, you know, when we sort of engage with design, we're sort of going, well, just because you can doesn't mean you should. They don't seem to have that problem, and they don't have that problem because they have venture capital. They have venture capital that is saying, you know what, I'm going to take a risk. This might be okay. But one of the things that startups find very difficult is actually monetizing their business model after a period of time. They've taken all this venture capital money, and now they've created a business model that actually doesn't require you to pay for anything. Their customer is the venture capitalist, not you, the consumer. And it means that 9-to-1 ratio means that service that you started to rely on is gone in 3 to 4 years. And it's really annoying. So think about that. Take Ubiquity seriously, because if you're ubiquitous, if your platform becomes the App Store or it becomes Google, you're now essentially an international public service. And that's really serious, Because again, just as we don't have any language to talk about collectivity, we don't have any laws that deal with it either very well. You know, Google have famously just removed RSS. I think probably a lot of people here kind of feel a bit angry about that. I know I do, but I have no control over that. They're a private public service, so take your Ubiquity seriously. Take your users' needs seriously. We all know that, you know this, but just remember it. Be modular. You know, define the edges of your things. Make sure that the things that you make fit together with other people's things. Make sure that you use standards, that you contribute to the standards that you use. If you're using HTML, just, you know, kind of be engaged in that. Be engaged in the process of defining those standards and use them. Anticipate future business needs. You're not only going to have to anticipate your customers' needs, you're going to have to anticipate the businesses that you provide that are created by your customers. It's going to get really, really messy and really confusing, but you're going to need to start thinking about lots and lots of possible futures, because you're going to need to start building capabilities that will basically scale to accommodate those capabilities. Create affordances. Imagine those possible futures. Imagine what might happen. Don't design one instance of the future. You don't know what the future is. I don't know what the future is. Collectively, we'll define it, but there won't be any rhyme or reason behind it. So try and think about what those futures might mean and make something that scales, that flexes to those things. Think about those sticks. It's simple. And ultimately, don't design the future. Design something the future can design. Thanks.